Let's jump right in. Welcome to this explainer. We're about to embark on a pretty intense journey today, and I just want to set the record straight right off the bat. This is absolutely not your typical feel-good, overly positive, self-help stuff. You know, we're not here to talk about manifesting easy success or just wishing away your struggles. No, we're going to look directly at the heavy, frankly brutal reality of human existence, and we're going to uncover the actual architecture of the human soul. Life is difficult. I really want you to just let that sink in for a second. Life is difficult. It's a stark, heavy truth, right? Most of us, we spend our entire lives moaning about our problems as if life is somehow supposed to be easy. But here's the big secret. Once you truly see this truth, once you fully accept that life is just a series of problems, you actually start to transcend the pain. It's like the pain doesn't magically stop, but it kind of stops mattering in the same way, because you're no longer fighting the reality of it.
And this heavy truth? It's the absolute core philosophy of M. Scott Peck's renowned psychological and spiritual masterpiece, The Road Less Traveled. Now, this text doesn't teach us how to dodge or avoid pain, because let's be real, that's literally impossible. Instead, it teaches us how to engage in what Carl Jung called legitimate suffering. It gives us the actual map to stop skirting around our issues and start suffering through them constructively.
So, the question we really have to ask ourselves is, do we moan about our problems or do we actually solve them? And look, I get it. This directly challenges our natural, instinctual desire to just run away when things get tough. But the entire meaning of life, the cutting edge that separates success from failure, it's found right there in the painful process of confronting and solving problems. Actually, scratch that. It's only because of problems that we grow mentally and spiritually in the first place.
Okay, so let's dive into the solution phase. Part 1. The framework of discipline.
If solving problems is the meaning of life, how do we actually go about doing it? Well, we use discipline. Now hold on, I know what you're thinking. We usually picture discipline as some drill sergeant screaming in our face, or some kind of cruel punishment, but that's a total misconception. Discipline is simply the essential toolkit we need to navigate life's pain. It's basically the set of techniques for legitimate suffering, and there are 4 foundational tools in this kit: delaying gratification, the assumption of responsibility, a dedication to the truth, and balancing. We absolutely have to master these if we want to avoid the mental illnesses and neuroses that come from dodging reality.
To see how this plays out in real life, think about the story of a financial analyst who was constantly procrastinating at work. When her therapist asked how she eats a piece of cake, she admitted, "Well, I eat the sweet frosting first." Boom! That was her whole problem. She did the easy, gratifying work first and left hours of dreadful tasks for later. Delaying gratification literally means eating the cake first. You schedule the pain early to enhance the pleasure later. Honestly, it's the only decent way to live.
All right, let's move on to the second tool here. Part 2, the great divide of responsibility.
Look, you simply cannot solve a problem by saying, "It's not my problem." You can't solve it by hoping someone else is just going to come along and fix it for you. And when we struggle with this pretty self-evident truth, we usually fall into one of 2 camps of evading pain. On one side, we have the neurotic. The neurotic assumes way too much responsibility, constantly saying, "I ought to do this, I should do that," basically taking the blame for everything wrong in the world. On the other side, the person with a character disorder takes 0 responsibility. They're constantly saying, "I can't, I had to," blaming society, their boss, the system, the whole shebang for their own personal failures.
And here's where it gets really rough. The devastating social cost of all this evasion: neurotics make themselves miserable. Those with character disorders make everyone else miserable. This is especially tragic when it comes to parenting. Parents with character disorders totally duck responsibility and end up visiting their sins right upon their kids. They'll blame the schools or bad influences for their kids' behavior, basically serving as perfect role models of absolute irresponsibility. So, the crucial point we need to take away here is this really hard truth. If you cast your personal pain onto society, you just turn yourself into dead weight. When we blame everything else for our problems, those problems just persist. Nothing gets accomplished. We stop growing spiritually, and we literally become part of the problem.
Okay, we're going to take an abrupt pivot now to something that requires immense responsibility. Part 3, shattering the myth of romance. Get ready to toss out all your fairy tale misconceptions, okay? The myth of romantic love tells us there's this one perfect match out there, written in the stars, and if we just find them, all our needs will be magically met without any effort.
But to combat that really dangerous myth, we have to look at Peck's highly specific, almost clinical definition of love. He defines it as the will to extend oneself for the purpose of nurturing one's own or another's spiritual growth. Did you catch what's missing there? Yeah, no mention of butterflies or romance. Love is actual work.
We really have to deconstruct this idea of romantic infatuation. Falling in love is not real love. It's just this effortless, temporary collapse of our ego boundaries. Honestly, it's essentially a biological, genetic trick to trap us into mating and marriage. Real love, on the flip side, is a courageous act of will. It requires immense effort to extend your boundaries and actively nurture another person's spirit.
So we need a massive paradigm shift here. Love is as love does. Love is not a feeling, it is a decision. A genuinely loving person acts constructively toward their partner or their child, even when they feel entirely drained, or even when there's zero romantic spark at all. The commitment stands whether the feeling is present or not. It's about showing up.
Moving right along to part 4, the shadow, laziness and grace.
Think about this for a second. If love is the effortful force of evolution, what's the true opposite of love? You might naturally expect the answer to be hate, but it's not. The actual opposite of love is sheer laziness. We call this internal gravity entropy. It's the original sin. It is the terrifying force inside every single one of us that begs us to avoid the hard work of growing up. It's that dark little voice that just wants to retreat to the comfort of childhood, to just stay under the covers, rather than face the arduous, painful journey of spiritual evolution.
And this laziness is the absolute root of our psychological decay. As Carl Jung so brilliantly put it, neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering. Our desperate, incredibly lazy attempts to avoid necessary suffering, they don't actually save us from pain. Nope. They just manifest as our deepest mental illnesses. The substitute ends up being far, far worse than the original problem.
So it all builds to this inescapable climax. Do we choose laziness or do we choose spiritual growth? Inside every single one of us, there's a sick self that wants comfort at absolutely any cost, and a healthy self that desperately wants to evolve. But here's the catch. We cannot sit still. We're either doing the disciplined work of love to push forward, or we are actively sliding backward into entropy. There's no neutral ground here.
But hey, the good news is we aren't entirely alone in this brutal battle against entropy. We have to balance all this heavy responsibility with the beautiful concept of grace. Grace is this powerful force originating outside our own consciousness that actively nurtures our spiritual growth. It shows up as serendipity, as miracles, and as the deep, deep wisdom of our unconscious mind. Sometimes it even manifests as painful psychological symptoms, just to act as a red flag to warn us that we're off track.
To really harness this grace and hit the highest level of growth, we must practice what Peck calls bracketing. This is the intense discipline of putting your own self aside, basically decentralizing your ego, so you can welcome new, strange realities. We literally have to let go of our old maps of the world, which, I know, feels kind of like a death, but it's totally necessary to allow the birth of a new, much more expansive understanding. Which finally brings us to our ultimate evolutionary purpose. We are called to extend ourselves, to love, and to grow. But remember, with that growth comes immense awareness and agonizing responsibility. It's so much easier to just remain a child, isn't it? So, I'm going to leave you with this final, provocative question to take away from this explainer. Will you succumb to the laziness of entropy, or will you accept the terrifying responsibility of growing toward godhood?